Dad.
Gets him every time.
How'd you get that cucumber in here? They're not even in season.
Welcome to Hello PhD, a podcast for scientists and the people who love them. Today on the show, we talk with a graduate student who traveled halfway around the globe to pursue a PhD and find out the best and worst parts of graduate training for international students. Stay with us.
And we're back. This is Hello PhD, episode 22. I'm Joshua Hall.
And I'm Daniel Arneman.
And we'll discuss the human side of science and life in the lab. How's it going, Dan?
It's going great, Josh. How are you doing?
I'm doing well. How was your Thanksgiving?
Awesome. Did you get out for Black Friday?
I've got out of bed eventually on Black Friday.
That's the way to do it. It's better to avoid the entire mess.
Absolutely. Dan, we got some more Kansas beer today.
Oh, excellent. I love Kansas beer.
Yeah, I mentioned a few episodes ago we had a listener from the University of Kansas in Lawrence who sent us some beer from Free State Brewing, and actually they were kind enough to send us two different kinds of beer. So we have a different one today. This is the Copperhead Pale Ale from Free State Brewing.
Delicious. We love a pale ale.
Always love a pale ale. This is a solid one. Can't go wrong with a pale ale. And actually, Dan, it was intentional. I was saving this one because today we're actually going to speak to a graduate student at the University of Kansas.
Ooh, tie-in feature.
Exactly. So,
excellent.
But before we get into that, Dan, now that Thanksgiving is behind us, you know what that means?
What does that mean?
That means it's time to start thinking about your Christmas lists.
Oh, I've already got it. Written up.
Yeah, you got your Christmas shopping started?
Yeah, I want pruners.
Pruners. Do you have some hedges that need tending, or?
Well, yeah, I think so. I just moved, and there are all these things I want to prune.
Oh yeah, I love trimming hedges. I do. It's like cutting hair, but
yeah, it is.
On plants.
You shape it; it looks good.
Dan, so I thought we could maybe help our listeners out with their shopping. Do you have any stocking stuffer ideas for the upcoming holiday season?
Well, I did recently see a list of toys that you should not buy, and included in this list was something that I was incredulous that this exists, but the time has come. This is called Poo-Doh. And Poo-Doh, yes.
Explain.
It is spelled P-O-O-dough. It is Play-Doh that is brown colored that comes with a special poo-shaped mold, so you can shape it and then leave it around the house. It says, place Poo-Doh around the house to prank family and guests. Sit back and enjoy the laughs.
So when you say poo, you mean fecal matter.
That is the joke. Yeah.
This is a real thing.
It is absolutely a real thing. I think anybody who is studying the gut microbiome needs to get some of this.
Oh, yeah. Every microbiome lab needs to have their own Poo-Doh.
People will crack up. We'll put a link to it on the website.
Where can you get Poo-Doh?
On Amazon.com. Although, I have to tell you, the reason that they said it was not safe for children is because it contains wheat. And so if you are allergic to wheat, do not buy Poo-Doh. Also, if you have any sense, or you're an adult, or...
because containing wheat is the biggest problem with Poo-Doh.
Yeah. Well, yes, fair enough.
You know, it also contains wheat. The actual poo of people who eat wheat.
That's true.
So keep that away from children.
We will not be airing any of this, don't worry.
So Dan, we're going to put a link to this on the show notes. If you want to buy your own Poo-Doh, get your Christmas shopping started early.
No, I'll send it as the etymology puzzle gift. That'd be...
That's right. So either answer the puzzle or buy some Poo-Doh.
Poo-Doh coming your way.
Hey, something else came across my radar that was pretty cool this week. The hottest internet sensation right now is cats versus cucumbers. Have you seen this, Dan?
Yeah, I saw that you tweeted it out, and I watched some of the cat videos, and they're hilarious, but I have no idea why cats are afraid of cucumbers.
Yeah, so for those of you who haven't seen this yet, not apparently, because there are plenty of people who've documented this on YouTube.
Science. Plenty of people equals science.
That's right. So if you sneak up behind your cat and place a cucumber on the floor next to them, your cat will freak out.
Yeah, they see it, and I guess it's just disconcerting that this thing has snuck up on them? I don't understand.
Oh, I have so many questions, Dan. So many follow-up experiments. Like, does it have to be a cucumber? What about a zucchini?
You do own a cat. You could do this. We talked about, citizen science a couple of weeks ago with the beekeeping episode. Let's do it.
That's true. Hello, PhD listeners. If you have any follow-up studies on the cats versus cucumbers, we need to know. I did see one of the video clips. There was a cucumber and 2 bell peppers, and the cat seemed to selectively attack the cucumber. So
weird. So this is what you have to do. You have to do the cucumber. But I wonder if the cat can be desensitized. If you do too many trials, the cat's like, oh, that cucumber just following me everywhere.
It could be. But, the reason I'm actually talking about this here, Dan, is something cool happened this week. Some very enterprising graduate students at Cornell University created their own video called Scientists versus Cucumbers.
Similar results for the scientists frightened?
Turns out scientists and cats have the exact same reaction to cucumbers placed surreptitiously in the lab.
I don't want to alarm you, but do not turn around. There may be a cucumber right behind you.
Son of a... Dad.
Gets him every time.
How'd you get that cucumber in here? They're not even in season. It better be organic. So yeah, definitely check out. We will also link the Scientists versus Cucumbers link. I think I tweeted it out a couple days ago. But be sure to watch until the final scene. It is pretty hilarious.
Awesome. Now, in more serious news, you actually were able to talk to a graduate student who, it sounds like, has come a very, very long way to study in the United States. You mentioned that she is at University of Kansas right now?
Yeah, so I had a chance to speak with Haifa, and she is a graduate student at Kansas, like you said, originally from Saudi Arabia. And so one of the things that we thought would be interesting is to get her perspective on some of the unique challenges that international students face coming to graduate school here in the United States, as if grad school is not hard enough.
Yeah, it is definitely hard enough. So let's hear what she had to say.
All right.
So, hello everyone. My name is Haifa Al-Hadian, and I am a second-year graduate student in Molecular Biosciences Department at the University of Kansas.
So I guess the first question would be, what made you decide to pursue a career in science, and what made you decide you wanted to go to graduate school?
Okay, so I have been passionate about science since I was a little. I love explore and question everything, and to be honest, I can't imagine myself doing anything other than science. So when I graduated from my bachelor program, you basically apply for an English center, and then after they accepted you, you go to United States, travel there, and you basically study for a whole year. And then after you completed all the courses, then you apply for the University of Kansas or for any university that you really want.
So what made you decide to choose Kansas?
So this is the funny thing. The city that I really wanted to be in is small city and quiet, and it's perfect for students to maybe do fun thing, but at the same time focus on their work. I chose University of Kansas because they have an English center. It's called Applied English Center, and they basically prepare you for not only to be to speak English, but also to meet the qualifications that other native speakers have, either a bachelor degree or a master or a PhD.
So one question I have is, was it challenging to decide to leave your home and come to the United States to study?
Actually, yeah, kind of, because it was my first time being away from home, travel outside Saudi Arabia. So it was really challenging to be exposed to different culture, to different language, having no experience in science before. I mean, I know I graduated from zoology, but I was sure that it will be totally different from the science here. So maybe, yeah, it was really challenging. Especially my mom, she didn't realize that I'm gonna leave until the day that I traveled. Yeah, it was a really difficult day that day.
My next question is, what are some of the biggest challenges that you have faced since you came to the United States and started graduate school that are specific to being an international student?
Yeah, so the first thing is the language. I know maybe some international students, they don't face the same problem. But for me, it was really difficult because I had to master the language in 1 year and join the grad school right away. And also, my field of study, which is developmental biology combined with genetics, you have to know how to explain the phenotype. And this is my weaknesses. And I'm going to one of my weaknesses, and I'm going to just admit that. Because you need to have a lot of vocabulary that's not specific, not formal kind of language, like English language, and to make it more simpler for the listeners to understand the phenotype. So maybe this is a really challenge. Sometimes I would just grab a paper and then draw it instead of just saying it. Maybe the scientific communication, maybe it's difficult for us as an international students who don't have a really strong English background.
Let's pause here a second, Josh. This is something that I hadn't really considered when thinking about traveling as an international student. She's doing this work on fruit flies, and a lot of that work is about describing these new phenotypes that they're generating. That would be really, really difficult if you didn't know the words for curly-winged and the legs are jointed this way or the body shape is this shape. If you only know that in your own language, how do you describe that to somebody else?
Yeah, it's funny to tie this into the main topic of our show last week, which was non-technical writing and the importance of all the communication, which is most of the communication we actually do on a day-to-day basis in the lab that is a lot more informal, and how critical it is to be able to do that effectively, that informal communication, and how hard that would be. Because Dan, have you ever learned a second language?
I took French in high school, and so I could say something is pretty, or I could say it's fat, or but that's about it. Or red, I could say red.
Yeah, that's my Spanish knowledge. I would be, hopefully my fruit fly phenotype would be es muy gordo.
Yeah, yeah. You'd have to limit your research to things that you can say in the language that you're learning. And the one fruit fly phenotype I know is the cheap date one, where it gets drunk too fast.
Oh yeah, yeah, that's a good one.
Yeah,
there's the happy hour one too.
What does that do?
That maybe it gets drunk less fast.
Okay, we need to learn more Drosophila genetics. But the barrier is real, and it's not something that they're going to teach you in a class. I don't know how you go about acquiring this type of nuanced language.
Yeah, I think it's just a time and experience thing. I was in graduate school with a student from Guatemala, and he was saying when he actually came to the United States to do his work, he was very careful not to live with other Spanish-speaking students, because I think, sometimes what you can do, understandably, is probably what I would do, is you seek out maybe other international students or other students who speak the same language as you, so at least when you go home, you can speak in your native tongue. But he always told me about how he did the opposite, because he thought it would help him more quickly come up to speed and get comfortable with conversational English, which is very different than just the formal English you would learn in class. He's
probably right, but it'd be exhausting. You'd want that kind of low energy state to be able to just relax and think in your own language and talk in your own language. But, she admits this is a challenge for her, and it's something that she's going to work on. It's better than pretending like it's not hard and pretending like it's not something that she's going to need help with. I think the people in the lab are more likely to support her because she's able to say, look, I know what this looks like, but I don't know the words for it. And then she can get them to teach her those words in English and use them in the papers or whatever she needs to write.
Yeah, and I think if there's a lesson here, Dan, I've worked with a number of English second language students, and I think sometimes there's a hesitancy among students to advocate for themselves or admit that they're having trouble understanding if English is not their first language. And, oftentimes I think this is an issue with us who are native English speakers, who have the privilege of actually doing science in our native tongue. But we're not necessarily going to think about it. We're not necessarily, and PIs, I imagine, are not necessarily going to take that into consideration. So, really advice would be, I think, for international students would be, if English is not in your comfort zone, to really be upfront about, hey, you know what, I didn't get that, or, could you say that again, or could you help me come up with the words for this?
That's great. Well, let's get back to the interview.
Okay. So I assume you probably have other friends or colleagues who are also international students. And so what are some other challenges that you've observed that international graduate students in particular face during their training?
I think the environment of the lab, because like different culture have different way of like, I mean, the relationship between the students and the relationship between you and your mentor, it's different here than like in other international labs. I think it's different also from our country, basically, because so the way that in our country works, that there's barriers between you as a student and your mentor or your professor. There is not a lot of freedom that you can explain or question anything. Sometimes if you, I get the same problem when I ask a question and they said, you better like go and read about it because it's not that important. But here it's they give you the actual like opportunity to question everything, to even if your question isn't that important, they really appreciate the fact that you're thinking and you're observing the differences in your work.
Mm-hmm. No, that makes sense. So then I guess how would you describe that as being a challenge for an international student? Like understanding the difference in that culture. Is there an adjustment period?
I think it's the adjustment, yeah. Yeah. I remember like my first month in grad school, I was really isolated because I had problem. How can I deal with this situation? Because you've been like you've been raised in an environment that there's barriers between you and like your college, your friends and your mentor, and then you shifted to the environment that encouraged you to be exposed more as a scientist. And you expose your thinking process. So I think the shifting thing is really, really like kind of tricky sometimes. Yeah.
Okay, let's pause here again. That is something I hadn't really thought about in terms of the cultural differences of the lab. This difference between how you treat the hierarchy and the authority in different countries and different cultures.
Yeah, that's really interesting because, Dan, I think we both know, having been through the system, that one of the ways that PIs often will assess their graduate students is, I guess, the level of initiative the student takes to question things and maybe to not necessarily argue, but to challenge ideas and to speak up, and whether it's in lab meeting or in a seminar or even in a one-on-one meeting with the PI to actually challenge ideas. That's seen as a good thing.
You're expected to think critically. And my relationships with PIs have always been very conversational, not exactly peer-based. We're not exactly on the same level. You treat them like, I guess you treat them as if they are your boss, but you don't treat them as if they're this, the high up person that you can never, you kowtow to and you cower when they're in the room.
Yeah, and I don't know if you had the same experience as I did, Dan, but, being an undergraduate in the United States, the first time I got involved in the research lab was the first time I'd really interacted with a professor in that way. And so even the very act of, my mentor in my undergrad lab wanting me to call him by his first name, right? That was a really big deal, kind of a unique thing. So then by the time I got to graduate school, though, I was very used to that part of the culture that, oh yeah, you're on a first name basis with your PI.
Yeah, but not in every culture. In some cultures, it's doctor this or yeah.
Yeah, and that would definitely be a cultural barrier you'd have to adjust to that maybe domestic students don't have to.
This reminds me a lot. I don't know if you've seen Malcolm Gladwell's book Outliers. I'm not in love with Malcolm Gladwell's books, but I do think he uses some language that describes this dynamic. He tells a story about airline crashes, particularly the Korean airline. And he talks about how in the United States, there's a different cultural dynamic in the cockpit. So the co-pilot, if he sees a problem, he will bring it up and tell the pilot there's the problem. But in the book, he describes several airline crashes where the pilot is seen as the authority. The co-pilot sees a problem, but doesn't feel comfortable talking about it or calling it out. He suggests it very mildly. The pilot contradicts him. He suggests it mildly again. The pilot contradicts him, and he doesn't say anything. And then, he looks at the rates of plane crashes in these different cultures, but he calls them low power distance and high power distance. And I think that really describes what she's talking about here. Where she comes, where she grew up is a more high power distant culture in the lab. In the United States, it's lower power distance, and that allows her to speak up. I wonder if that has an effect on the quality of the science and the quality of the training.
Yeah, I think it very much could, because again, I think it's one of those unspoken rules that if you already have been in that culture of doing research here in the States, you're aware coming into graduate school, like we were just talking about, that that's the expectation, that that's a good thing. That's how you get noticed, how you get ahead. And so if you're not already there, you could easily, maybe you don't get in the best lab, or you don't get in on the project that has the most payoff because you didn't know you were supposed to, speak up that way.
Yeah,
or
you could be left out of the conversation because you assume that you shouldn't bring up these questions. It's really interesting. I would also like to hear from any listeners who have had experiences in labs. I'll use that language, low power distance and high power distance. Have you been in both types? And does one lead to better conversations, better inquiry, better science than the other? Or do you just get different types of research? Or really, how does it affect the culture of the lab? I'd be really interested to hear from people who have experienced that.
Yeah, and I think, like we just said, maybe something that we don't often think about, but for students, whether they're domestic students or international students, but students who come from different cultures than is the norm within the academic setting of a big research institution really have an extra steep hill to climb, because they're not just the normal challenges of graduate school, but this extra cultural evolution they have to go through to overcome to be successful.
Yeah, it is more difficult for sure. Well, let's go back to your interview and hear some more.
So I guess along those lines, if there was one thing you could change about graduate school that would make it better for international students, what would that be?
If we make the science has like more global language, basically teach undergrad back home in English other than in Arabic. I know a lot of people say this is your mother language and you have to be grateful for, and I'm really grateful. But now the English language now is more global, or the most international language that all the people speak. So if convert all the courses from being studied in Arabic to English, maybe will help a lot of international students from Arabic or from other language to English. Maybe will help a lot of international students. Maybe they will do better. The transition will be easier. Yeah, I think the transition will be easier.
So I have not been to Saudi Arabia yet, but I have been to Kansas. And so I would imagine culturally, those are two very different places. So what has it been like being a native of Saudi Arabia, living in the Midwestern United States? Culturally, what has that change been like?
Honestly, I didn't experience any major differences. Maybe because the city that I lived in, Lawrence, is small, and there is a lot of international students, basically because it's a student city. So there is a lot of international students. You can see the different. There is a lot of Saudi students as well. So I don't think there is any major differences between the two universities.
So have you decided on a career path? What do you want to do after graduate school?
I actually like doing outreach and doing research at the same time. I mean, I wish I can get my own lab maybe sometime in the future and be in academia other than maybe industry. I will use my knowledge that I gain in the United States to introduce model organisms and basic research to Saudi Arabia universities, because there is a lot of, I believe that there is a lot of smart people who can contribute to the scientific community back home, but the gap is still needs to be filled. So I hope I'm going to be the one who take care of this. I want to thank you, Josh, for inviting me to be interviewed in your podcast. I'm a really big fan, and I listen to it each Monday. I really enjoyed it. The only thing that I really want to say is that grad school is really hard. I really wanted to encourage all the students, not all the international students, but also like all the graduate students to keep the hard work and to enjoy what they're doing.
All right, Dan, so that was my interview with Haifa.
That was great. It was really fascinating to hear such a different perspective.
Yeah, definitely. And, I realized, Dan, from my privileged point of view of going through graduate school, as an American English-speaking citizen, I guess I wondered, how could we, one of the things we talk about a lot on the show is making the science training environment better for everybody.
Yeah, so what are the take-homes? What can we do about helping Haifa and people like her?
Yeah, and Dan, I think one of the things, or actually as she was talking about two of those big challenges that we highlighted, and those were the language barriers, right, as you get accustomed to doing science in English, but also some of these cultural differences about how you interact with your mentor and maybe even how you interact with your colleagues. I think there could be a lot of utility in having some sort of cultural training for faculty mentors who are going to take on graduate students or even postdocs, to understand or at least to bring to the forefront of their mind some of these very real challenges that their trainees might be going through that perhaps they're not aware of.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I have to say here, how exciting it is that the smartest, most passionate, most talented people in the world want to come here to study. And that is such an amazing, important thing. Anything we can do to make that easier and better is great. It's good for all of us.
Yeah, and there's actually research out there, Dan, that shows that a true diversity in backgrounds and ways of thinking about problems leads to better outcomes, better results, and better discovery.
Excellent. Well, can we move on to the etymology puzzle?
I'm excited about this one, Dan. You really stumped me this week.
I tried to obfuscate it as much as possible. The clue last week was, before there was a turducken, Carl Linnaeus named this special bird a guinea fowl chicken peacock. I'm looking for the genus and the species. And since you do not know the answer, I will tell you the answer.
Now, Dan, is this where we get the beer can guinea fowl chicken peacock?
Oh, interesting. Yes. No, that would just be the beer can chicken, right? Because this animal encompasses chicken with some other things.
What is it, Dan?
It is the name for the wild turkey, and it is Meleagris gallopavo. And Meleagris refers to a guinea fowl, and I think it refers to the spots. There are actually a lot of different species that have that name. There are flowers, and there are lizards and different things.
Is that like melanin?
I don't know. I couldn't find the actual origin of that word. I couldn't find like the deeper root. Etymology is like an onion, right? You can go layer by layer by layer.
Many layers.
But the second part, the species name, Gallus, and pavo refers to a peacock. And I'm assuming, Carl Linnaeus, he invented binomial nomenclature. I'm assuming he looked at the way the turkey spreads its tail. I don't know if you've seen a male turkey.
Absolutely.
A tom turkey. But it spreads its tail. So I'm thinking he looks at this and he's like, oh yeah, that's like a chicken peacock. Not quite as pretty as a peacock. Much bigger than a chicken.
That's one of them guinea chicken turkeys.
I think he probably said those same words in that exact same accent.
Guinea chicken peacocks.
Undoubtedly. All right. Well, hopefully you got to enjoy lots of Meleagris gallopavo at your Thanksgiving dinner. And I have another sort of holiday-themed clue for this week, if you're ready.
I am so ready. Lay it on me.
Okay. The clue this week is, a happy family may eat at the same table, but this group of bacteria also shares the meal. I'll read it again. A happy family may eat at the same table, but this group of bacteria also shares the meal. Remember, I'm looking for a scientific word described by the clue, and once you get it, you'll find the literal meaning of that science word as a phrase in the clue itself. If you think you know the answer, email it to puzzle@hellophd.com, and I'll randomly select a winner from the correct responses and send the lucky puzzler an Amazon gift card.
I love a microbiology puzzle.
It's a good one. I really enjoyed writing this one.
Dan, this was a great show. Thanks again, as always.
Thank you, sir. How do they get in touch with us if they want to?
So if you have a question that you would like answered on the show, you can email us podcast@hellophd.com or reach out to us on the Twitter @HelloPhD, or we have a Facebook page. You can get in touch with us that way.
On the Facebooks. And thank you to our friends in Kansas. We are still enjoying our Copperhead Pale Ale. The picture on the front is a hawk of some sort.
I believe that's a hawk.
But isn't a copperhead a snake?
I think it is. That's a good point, Dan.
I'm going to need to call somebody.
Go out there, get your Christmas shopping done, get your Pudo, and let us know your reaction.
Send us pictures? No. No, thank you.
We will create the newest internet sensation, Cats versus Pudo.
Do not send us pictures. And if you are allergic to wheat or know someone who is, please do not purchase that toy. We did not recommend it.
Pudo is right out.
Do not buy it.
We will see you next week.
See you next week.